Salutations! Welcome to Pages and Pages. Today I'm going to be doing another book review for you. Kind of a book review, more of a book discussion. This is the third time I've talked about this. No, fourth. This is the fourth time I've talked about this book on my channel. Look familiar? Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. So I won't do a review. I'm not going to tell you all the 50 reasons that you should read it. I'm just going to ask some questions about it that came to me while I was reading it and that I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on. If you've read it, if you haven't read it even, I think that this is a bigger conversation than just this book. This is a conversation about humanity and our capacity for good and evil. The first question has to do with motivation. Why do we do what we do? This book really explores a multitude of human motivations ranging from a most basic kind of hierarchy of needs, so hunger and the necessity of like shelter and that kind of thing, all the way into like greed and lust and the pursuit of truth and things you do for love. So there's just, this book covers a whole range of human motivations and really like takes the time to explore the outcomes of having each of those different kinds of motivations. Let me read this part to you. Ultimately, David Mitchell kind of comes to the conclusion that it's not really about your motivations, but rather what you believe. My recent adventures have made me quite the philosopher, especially at night when I hear naught but the stream grinding boulders into pebbles through an unhurried eternity. My thoughts flow thus. Scholars discern motions in history and formulate these motions into rules that govern the rise and fall of civilizations. My belief runs contrary, however. To wit, history admits no rules, only outcomes. What precipitates outcomes? Vicious acts and virtuous acts. What precipitates acts? Belief. Belief is both the prize and the battlefield within the mind, and in the mind's mirror, the world. So ultimately it comes down to whether we believe that humanity can overcome its hungers and its appetites, or if we believe that humanity is kind of fated to consume itself and there's nothing we can do about it. And so I'm wondering what side of that you fall on, and if you've read the book, which side of it do you think David Mitchell falls on? Because over and over in the book you see this kind of repeated pattern of humans doing terrible things to one another, but you also see a pattern of humans rising above and finding ways to usurp the power structure in any given situation and to turn the events kind of on their head, hoping for a better outcome. I mean, maybe this question just comes down to, are you a glass half empty or half full kind of person? But I think there's more to it than that. The second question I have about this book has to do with slavery and power struggles. Almost every character in this book, each of the short stories, tells the story of a character who is enslaved to something, whether that is actually to another person, to a corporation, or to their own passions. So they're always a slave to something, and then each of these stories is a story where it gets turned and they find liberation, or they get liberated, or they help liberate someone else. So setting captives free. This goes back to the power thing, right? So a lot of the conversation in this book is about might makes right, and if you have the power, should you use the power, and how do you use the power without becoming corrupt? To help us understand how to be free better, I think we need to understand what we are enslaved to. So what are the things in your life that are forcing you into this kind of pigeonhole where you can't get out, and what would happen if you were to turn the power structure over so that you can be free of that? What is involved in that pivotal moment of liberation, you know? So many of these stories, he leaves off right at kind of this pivotal moment, you know, right before there's this shift that happens that lets the character be free of whatever this thing is. There's another great quote in this book. I have this one memorized. Freedom is the fatuous jingle of our civilization, but only those deprived of it have the barest inkling of what it is. Comes from the Timothy Cavendish story if you're looking for it. I think it's in the second half. But that really strikes home for me because I've grown up in a free country and I've never been enslaved in a traditional kind of working for another person kind of slavery, but I am a slave in some ways, to my own appetites and my own temptations, where I feel like I have to behave one way when I could behave another way. And so I'm just curious how you go about pursuing freedom, both for yourself and for other people. Do you speak up for people? And how do you do that? Tell me a story about that, because that would be really inspiring to me. I really need to hear that. I think we all felt stuck in life, you know, and I think it's good to share stories of times where we got unstuck. I mean, even thinking like Winnie the Pooh, you know, when he gets stuck in Rabbit's entryway. Anyways, so that's the second question I had. The third thing I wanted to talk about was structure. I noticed something the second time through that I didn't notice the first time. Yes, this book is structured like a Russian nesting doll. Yes, you're getting like half the story and then you pick it up later. And they go kind of chronologically, so the middle story is the furthest in the future kind of story. And at the very center of the very futurist story, at the very middle of the book, you have this journey to the top and the descent from a mountain, which, I mean, mountaintop experiences are part of being a human and part of spiritual stuff, I know. But what struck me this time was that right there at the mountaintop, the main character in that story, Zachary, has 3 temptations, which very much resemble to me Paradise Regained, which, side note, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained to me have never felt really balanced. I mean, Paradise Lost, you just see this dramatic fall, you get this crazy new way of thinking about Satan, and you get this, like, gorgeous poetry, obviously. But Paradise Regained is so short, it's so brief, and yet so important. And I think it's interesting how Milton, rather than doing the whole Paradise Regained thing as the crucifixion and the resurrection, chooses instead the temptation of Christ. And so kind of tying that in with Cloud Atlas, I wanted to think about the way that temptation and not giving in to temptation lets us overcome terrible situations, bad choices as human beings. In the book, Zachary doesn't give in to 2 of the temptations, but does actually give in to one of them. And I kind of wonder if it's like David Mitchell saying, humans on a whole get like a 2 out of 3. Like we're 2 out of 3 times we're good, or maybe 6 out of 10 times we're good, but the other 4 really mess things up for people, you know? So that's kind of my like pet theory on that. But anyways, I'm curious what you think about temptation and overcoming temptation, what you do to get past that. And when I say temptation, I mean like times when you feel like you could say something or do something that wouldn't necessarily be the most helpful for the situation, but that would be very satisfying in the moment, you know? What are some of the ways you've learned to deal with the struggle of not giving into temptation? So finally, a couple more general questions about Cloud Atlas. One, there are so many literary references in here and like classical allusions and all of that. I want to know if you've read it, like what stood out to you. So many cool references to so many great writers. I would love to hear which ones you noticed so that I can like compare notes and pick up on things that I probably missed because I haven't read them. And then finally, if you have read this book, which one of these stories resonated most with you? And why do you think that is? In my book group, the consensus on this was that Frobisher's account was one of the ones that resonated most strongly because he was kind of that jerk face character, but he was also like a sentimental fool. So you get kind of these 2 sides of him, and you get this really like intimate, personal understanding of who this character is. I think it probably comes from the way that those chapters are presented because they're written as personal letters, so you're getting a very like, they're all first-person narratives, but that one is very, like, inside the character's mind. So I think that's probably why a lot of people in my book group, at least, felt close to that character. But I'm curious what character you felt closest to, if there was one. If none of them stood out to you, that's fine, too. I didn't really have one that resonated more with me. I thought they were all beautiful and different in their own way. And I really respect David Mitchell as an author for being able to write so many different characters in so many different times and like making each a distinct, beautiful voice. So those are some questions that I had regarding Cloud Atlas, regarding life in general, regarding being a human. I would love, love, love for you to get involved in this conversation. So if you have thoughts on any of those things, just leave it down in the comments. Let's have this conversation. I'm very excited about that. So thank you for watching this video. Have a lovely day, and I'll talk to you in the comments.